Welcome back to our class on Worldview Apologetics. Welcome back after a couple of weeks. Of course, we had a week's break last week for July 4th. Apparently, you have some sort of holiday on July 4th and you didn't want to meet. No, I do know it was Independence Day, and I hope you had a good one. I was in Britain. Thought maybe the best place for a Brit on Independence Day would be Great Britain, so that's where I was. In fact, I just got back last night from Scotland, and if I sound a little bit jet-lagged this evening, that's because I am a little bit jet-lagged, and I'm still on Scottish time. My brain thinks it's midnight right now, so we'll do the best that we can. I did think about recommending that you disregard 50% of what I say tonight because of the jet lag, but then that would just raise the question, well, which 50%? So if you think there's anything that should be disregarded, you can raise that in the Q&A. Well, where are we in our class? We're on week 4. Just a quick recap of what we covered in previous weeks. In the first week, we looked at worldview foundations. What is a worldview? Why is it important? What are the components of a worldview? And I took you through that acronym that I use that helps me think through the different areas of a worldview. TAKES, what it takes to make a worldview. The T for theology, A for anthropology, K for knowledge, E for ethics, S for salvation. And then we looked at what the Christian worldview would be under those headings. And the second week we looked at evaluating worldviews, and I introduced you to these 8 tools for evaluating worldviews, and then said a little bit about how we can use those in evangelism to get people to think about worldviews, think about their own non-Christian worldview, whatever it may be, and to make a meaningful comparison with the Christian worldview and show them that the Christian worldview is, in fact, the more reasonable worldview, the worldview that makes best sense of the world that we live in. And then last week, well, not last week, 2 weeks ago it was, we started on a series looking at different worldviews. We started with the worldview of naturalism, which I said is the most common manifestation of the atheist worldview. If you come across an atheist, particularly a consistently thinking modern atheist, then most likely they'll have the worldview of naturalism, which says that the universe is all there is. The physical universe, the natural universe is all there is, and we are ultimately just physical entities like everything else. There's no ultimate purpose or meaning in this universe. And we talked a little bit about how we can evaluate that worldview and show some of the very serious problems that there are in that worldview. As we saw, we applied some of those tools. Well, we're moving on from naturalism this week to another worldview, which is also really, as we'll see, a secular worldview. There are 2 major worldviews in our culture today, competitors to Christianity. And the first is naturalism, the second is the one that we'll be looking at this evening. One of the most popular and iconic movies of recent times, I say recent times, this movie actually came out in 1999, is The Matrix. I'm sure many of you have seen this movie. In The Matrix, the protagonist, by the name of Neo, discovers that what he thought was reality was just a virtual reality, a computer-generated world called the Matrix. And Neo, with the help of some others, manages to disengage from this virtual reality, and he discovers that the real world is even worse than the virtual one. But he learns that, again, with the help of others who have also stepped out of the Matrix, he learns that he can re-enter the Matrix and he can control or bend that reality with his own mind. He can actually change that reality with his own thoughts. And so this virtual reality, this Matrix, isn't just a computer construct. It's partly determined by Neo's own thoughts and desires. And that's true for the other people who join with him in the Matrix. They enter the Matrix and they can bend reality. Early on in the movie, the distinction between the real world and the Matrix is fairly clear. But later on in the movie, and even more so I think in the sequels, the distinction between the virtual reality and the real reality becomes somewhat blurred. For example, one of the characters who helped to free Neo from the Matrix later on betrays him and the others because he decides that the virtual reality is just as good, or in fact even better, than the real reality. So why not say that the virtual reality just is the real reality, if you prefer it? If they're indistinguishable, then why not just choose the virtual reality and call that reality? In one of the sequels to The Matrix, there were 2 sequels, in one of them, Neo himself discovers that he can actually bend reality outside the Matrix as well as inside. And so again, the distinction between the 2 realities, the 2 worlds, becomes blurred. So in this movie, in this series of movies, you have 3 themes, 3 very interesting themes. First, you have a reality that is in some sense dependent on human thought. Second, you have multiple competing realities. And third, you have the subtle insinuation that there's no definitive reality. There's no really real reality that's real and all the others aren't real. And that if anyone chooses a particular world, then it's really an arbitrary choice. There's not one that's objectively real. The distinctions are blurred. Well, these 3 themes that I just outlined are central themes of the worldview that we'll be considering this evening. And that is what I'm calling the postmodernist worldview, the postmodernist worldview. Postmodernism is notoriously difficult to define precisely. We've heard the word, or familiar with the word itself, but what exactly it stands for is a difficult question. According to one writer, trying to define postmodernism is like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. Very difficult to do. Nevertheless, we can identify some distinctive themes that are most commonly associated with postmodernism, and there's certainly themes that are commonly expressed and reflected in our culture and our media today. So when I talk about postmodernism, although it has some connection with what we might call academic postmodernism, really what I have in mind here is a more popular and in some ways quite a naive and simplistic form of postmodernist thought and culture. The sort of thing that we would find the man or woman on the street expressing from time to time, and expressed in the media, sitcoms, other means by which our culture is expressed today. What is the basic idea? For each of these worldviews, I've tried to boil down the worldview to one basic idea to sort of serve as the center of the wheel, and then we'll add spokes to the wheel later on. The basic idea behind postmodernism is this, as I'm defining it: there's no such thing as objective reality. There's no such thing as objective reality. We'll unpack that idea in more detail in just a moment, but the emphasis here lies on the word objective. There's no such thing as objective reality. And we'll see what that word precisely means in a moment. Some of you may remember the TV show The X-Files. Perhaps you've watched The X-Files. Some people suggested that The X-Files was a postmodern TV series, but its tagline was this: the truth is out there. The truth is out there. One of the characters had this on a poster in his office. The truth is out there. That was sort of the motto of his career. If anything, postmodernism takes the exact opposite view. The postmodernist would say the truth isn't out there as some objective thing that's out there to be discovered. The truth is inside us. For some who think in a postmodernist way, they would say that the truth is inside our minds. What we call truth is really a construction, a mental construction. Others might say, well, the truth is inside us, but it's inside our hearts. What's true is what we feel to be true, or strongly desire to be true, or personally experience to be true. But the common theme here is that there's no objective truth. There's no truth that's independent of anyone's perspective. What we might say is truth, period. It's determined by something out there independent of us. There's no objective reality, a reality that's not defined or constructed by us, either individually or as a society or community. So this is the basic idea behind postmodernism. Where did it come from? Why did this postmodernist outlook arise in the first place? Well, a full answer would take really a lecture in itself, but I think we can identify two basic reasons why this postmodernist outlook has arisen. The first is a disillusionment with modernism. You can tell from the very word itself, postmodernism, going after modernism. What is modernism? Modernism is the intellectual and cultural outlook that came out of the Enlightenment period, roughly the 17th and 18th centuries. And this was an outlook that really held human reason as the ultimate standard and was rather dismissive of divine revelation, but put a great emphasis on science, what can be figured out by human reason, and particularly the new scientific method. Today, modernism is represented mainly by the naturalist worldview that we looked at last time. But many thinkers in the 20th century became rather disillusioned with modernism. Modernism had promised a lot, but it hadn't delivered. According to modernism, science would be the savior. Science would solve all our problems. But it's become clear that science hasn't saved us. The same science that gave us atomic energy also gave us the atomic bomb, which caused a lot of pain and destruction. Modernists thought that human reason, if we could just lay aside religious superstitions and just use our reason consistently, then we would have agreement on all the major issues that human beings debate. We would come to agreement if we would just all use human reason. But that clearly hasn't happened. And then there are various cultural movements that have eroded the appeal of modernism. Globalization, realizing that there's a vast diversity of perspectives, religious, ideological perspectives in the world. Pluralism, the idea that really there isn't one unified way of thinking, but we need to allow for multiple perspectives. There are multiple valid perspectives. And egalitarianism, another movement that we'll talk about a little later on. Modernism was very much a Western viewpoint. It came out of really Western culture. But globalization in particular has forced us to face up to a plurality of viewpoints in the world. And so the modernist ideal turns out to be rather parochial, rather Western, and so it's been dismissed as something for a previous age and previous generations. The second thing that, the second significant idea that has given rise to postmodernism is what the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche called the death of God. The death of God. He didn't literally mean that God had died, as though God were the sort of being that could die. Really what he meant was the death of the idea of God. The idea, really the biblical idea of God, that there is a creator who governs the creation and is the ultimate source of all things, the ultimate authority, the ultimate standard. Nietzsche thought that the idea of God had become discredited, and so he spoke about the death of God, and culture really had to come to terms with the fact that you couldn't credibly believe in God anymore. He was saying this in the 19th century. But if you say that God is dead, then, or at least the idea of God is dead, we can't anymore credibly believe that this is a God-centered universe, a number of things follow. There's no objective morality. Nietzsche recognized this. Which leads to a moral relativism. As the novelist Dostoevsky said, or at least often claimed to have said, if there is no God, everything is permitted. If there is no God, everything is permitted. No objective absolute morality. There would be no transcendent values, which really leads to a position of nihilism, that nothing has an objective meaning or purpose or significance. Again, Nietzsche argued that this is what followed or threatened to follow from the death of God. And also there's no absolute truth, leading to subjectivism, the idea that truth is really person relative. There's my truth, there's your truth, but there's no objective truth. And skepticism, that there's really no truth to be known. We think the truth is out there, as the X-Files puts it, but there's really no truth out there to be known in the first place. In previous eras, God had served as an anchor for transcendent universal truths. To discover truth was really to discover the thoughts of God's mind. But when you do away with God, you ultimately do away with truth as well. So these are some of the intellectual and cultural factors that have brought us to where we are today, to the 20th century, really, where postmodernism starts to come to the fore, becomes a significant worldview in its own right. Let's look at this worldview then, analyzing it in a bit more detail under that acronym, the TAKES acronym that we've used before, starting with T, theology. Recall that the theology part of a worldview concerns not just its view of God, but its view of ultimate reality. What is the ultimate reality for this worldview? Well, for postmodernism, really, there's no objective ultimate reality. What we call reality, or less enlightened generations had called reality, is just a human construction. There is no reality that's independent of human thought and human activity and human descriptions. Reality depends on what we think and how we speak. When we speak about the real world, the way things really are, really we're talking about how we've decided to describe the world, how we've decided to think about our experiences. In many respects, for the postmodernist worldview, there's no distinction between appearance and reality. The ancient Greeks, or many of the ancient Greeks, would have made a distinction between the way things appear to us and the way things really are. But for the postmodernists, by and large, how the world appears to a person just is their reality. Why make any distinction? We don't have access, the postmodernists will say, we don't have access to anything beyond our experiences, beyond the way the world appears to us. So what good is a distinction like that? The way the world appears to you just is your reality. And to some extent, you can change the way the world appears to you by thinking in certain ways, by directing your experiences, by interpreting your experiences in a certain way. What does the postmodernist say about God? Well, on the surface, the postmodernist worldview suggests that whether there is a God depends on how you see things, depends on your particular religious perspective, your particular religious tradition. It's very characteristic of postmodernism to say that religious truths about God, if you're a Christian, truths about Jesus, they're really person relative or community relative. They're not transcendent, absolute, objective truths. They're just the way that a certain person believes or thinks, or a community, let's say the Christian church, happens to think about things and understand their experiences. So on the surface, it's very pluralistic. There is a God, if you think there is, if that's how you see the world. If you see the world in God terms, then for you and for your community, there is a God. But when you dig beneath the surface, it becomes clear that postmodernism really rejects the existence of God. At least God as traditionally understood, as biblically understood. The God that is presented to us by the Bible, there can be no God like that for the postmodernist. Because if there were such a God, if the God of the Bible did exist, then he would be the objective, ultimate reality, the controlling, determining reality. There would be objective truth, there would be objective value, there would be objective moral standards. There would be a definitive and authoritative perspective on reality, God's perspective as the creator of all things. But that would be completely at odds with the spirit of postmodernism. And so, really, postmodernism can't allow for a God like that. In other words, what postmodernism really says is this: sure, you can have God. You can have any God you want, whatever God suits you, whatever God works for you, just so long as that God is not the absolute God of the Bible. Somewhat ironically, we actually find ourselves faced with this worldview. We find ourselves back in the situation faced by the early Christians in the first century, who found themselves in a very pluralistic society. What this society around them objected to was not that they called Jesus Lord. You can call Jesus Lord. What they objected to was when Christians claimed that Jesus is the only Lord. The only Lord. It was that exclusive position, that absolutist position, that was unacceptable in that day, and it's equally unacceptable in our day. Moving on to anthropology. Again, I apologize for having to use this word. It's the only way I could get the acronym to work. Needed another vowel to get in there. Really, this is, what does a worldview say about human beings? What we are, where we came from, where we're going to. What are we, according to the postmodernist way of thinking? What are human beings? Well, remember that according to postmodernism, reality is just a construction of human thought and human language. Reality is defined, created, if you will, by human beings. It isn't something that's independent of us and that stands above us and we're subject to. And what this implies is that we are ultimately whatever we say or think that we are. We determine what human beings are. And that means that ultimately we are whatever we choose to be, because each of us is free to choose to think or speak about ourselves in the way that suits us, in the way that works for us. Postmodernism is actually a very pragmatic worldview. There was a philosophical movement called pragmatism that said that truth is what works for you, what gets you the results, what gets you where you want to go. And an argument can be made that postmodernism is actually the fruit of that pragmatist outlook. But what this means, what this perspective on human nature means, is that strictly speaking there is no such thing as human nature in any fixed or objective sense. Human nature isn't something that's given to us that defines us from outside ourselves. There is no nature that is just given to us that's imposed on us from outside, for example, by a creator God. And from that, it follows, if there's really no such thing as human nature that's universal and defined for all of us, it follows that there's no objective purpose or meaning to life, that there are no objective obligations or expectations for human beings that are standing outside of us, that are imposed from outside, and there are no objective constraints on our thinking or our behavior. What I mean by objective is, again, independent of us, independent of how we think and how we say, things that are external, defined independently of us. Here are some cultural, modern-day cultural examples of this way of thinking about human nature. One example would be what is rather euphemistically called gender reassignment surgery. Gender reassignment surgery. We see these stories in the news from time to time where a person thinks, well, I was born with a male body, but I'm really female inside, and so they have surgery to try and bring what they think their physical body ought to be in line with their actual personality. But the idea here is that, to some extent, you can define what gender you are. You can choose what gender you are, and that gender as a category isn't something that's just imposed on you, that someone tells you, or you're born with a certain gender and that's the end of it. No, gender is malleable and it's changeable, and there are no fixed boundaries. We can move from one to the other. In fact, there's such a thing, you may have come across this term, transgenderism. Transgenderism, a very radical view, would have been, I think, utterly inexplicable to people of earlier generations. But transgenderism is the idea that the two familiar categories of male and female aren't exhaustive and shouldn't be considered exhaustive. The very idea of gender, so it is argued, is arbitrary, and it's really a social construction. There's no objective fixed gender categories, male and female, that people have to be put into. Rather, we just, as a society, have developed these categories, but we're free to change them. We're free to add categories. Some would argue that there are third or fourth categories, that a person could be neither male nor female, but some other category. It's all something that we as a society have determined, whether intentionally or unintentionally. There's nothing fixed or absolute about it. Another cultural example would be the animal rights movement. And here I mean the radical animal rights movement. You know, if you care about lost kittens and lost dogs and you want them to be well treated and that sort of thing, that's fine. But here I'm talking about the radical animal rights movement, where no killing, no testing on animals, no any kind of harm, really treating animals as though they have all the dignity of human beings, and in some respects more dignity and more value than human beings. But what underlies that idea about animal rights is that there's nothing unique about human beings. We're not objectively special, certainly not made in the image of God or anything like that. There's nothing objectively to distinguish us from other creatures, other organisms on this earth. And that leads to all kinds of radical ideas, and in many respects a downplaying of human dignity, because the idea that there is a distinctive, significant human nature that is defined independently of us, that idea has been abandoned. Other things that follow from this view of humanity, there are no intrinsic authorities or hierarchies among human beings, because that again would imply that there's something objective and external to us. There's some objective external standard or constraint that tells us that human society ought to be structured and ordered in a certain way. And there are no genuine inequalities between human beings, and there are no fixed boundaries for the very same reason, because who would define those boundaries? The idea of an absolute God, creator God, has really been done away with. So it's up to us to choose, to determine how we're going to organize things, what boundaries we will impose and what we won't impose. Postmodernism is radically egalitarian, rejecting any intrinsic authorities, hierarchies, boundaries, differences within the human species, if we can even speak about a human species. Let's move on to K, knowledge. What's the postmodernist outlook on knowledge? Well, postmodernists typically take a very skeptical view of human knowledge and the powers of human reason. Really, no one knows anything. No one knows anything. The very idea of knowledge is a modernist idea that ought to be abandoned. It's a hangover from Enlightenment ways of thinking. And some postmodernists will suggest we now know better. We know better than to claim that we have knowledge, which is paradoxical in itself. I mean, what do we know better that tells us that we don't really know anything at all? But there's no knowledge because simply there's no truth. There's no truth out there to discover. Again, the X-Files is wrong. The truth isn't out there to be known. Truth, if we can speak about truth at all, is a human social construction. We create truth by the way that we speak, by the way that we act, by the way that we think. Truth is not an objective thing. It's not out there. Truth is always defined relative to individuals or to societies. There are different kinds of relativism, depending on what you say truth is relative to, but whatever truth is, it's something relative. And that radically affects your view of knowledge. Knowledge isn't about lining your thoughts up with some truth out there. If anything, knowledge is about creating new truths from your way of thinking. What about human reason? What's the postmodernist view of human reason? Well, really, it's rejecting the Enlightenment modernist idea that there are universal standards of reason. This was almost an axiom of Enlightenment thought, that there are universal standards of reason that everybody deep down knows or has access to, and if we can just agree on those, recognize those, and use them consistently, then we'll have everything figured out. But that was a modernist idea, which postmodernism wants to move beyond. There are no universal standards of reason, rather there are different standards. There are different ways of reasoning. Either individuals reason in different ways or communities reason in different ways. They might say one man's logic is another man's lunacy. It's all a matter of perspective, where you stand. For example, Eastern philosophies often seem quite illogical to Westerners. Sometimes they seem downright crazy. What's the sound of one hand clapping? That sort of idea. Some of these things that's said in some Eastern philosophies. Well, that makes no sense. Well, they'll say it makes sense from the Eastern point of view, but not from the Western point of view. The idea of what's reasonable, what makes sense, is relative to your culture, your background, your perspective, and all the rest. Reason isn't all it's cracked up to be, is the theme here. And in fact, experience. Experience is a better guide than reason. Reason won't get us where we want to be. It's let us down. So instead, we should rely more on experience. Go with your heart rather than with your head is really the sentiment of the postmodernist. Moving on to ethics. E for ethics, morality. What is the postmodernist view of ethics, of morality? Well, here, interestingly, we find a lot of agreement, at least on the surface, with the worldview of naturalism that we looked at last time. And really for much the same reason that both naturalism and postmodernism deny the existence of an absolute God, such as the Bible presents to us, reveals to us. So for the postmodernist, really as for the naturalist, there is no objective distinction to be made between good and evil, between right and wrong. There are no transcendent, out there standards of good and evil, right and wrong. There are no absolute moral standards. We can't say that something is right, period, or wrong, period, end of story, for everyone, everywhere. Morality, like truth, we thought about a moment ago, morality, for the postmodernist, is a human cultural convention. Human beings get together and they agree, this is how we're going to live. We're going to say that this is good and this is bad, this is right and this is wrong. Morality, like truth, is relative. It's relative to either the individual, what is right or wrong is what is right or wrong for you, in your own eyes, or societies. Societies will come together and have some agreement on what is considered right or wrong, and that will make it right or wrong for them. So some examples of this phenomenon would be the suggestion that whether polygamy, that is, having multiple spouses, whether that's right or wrong depends on your culture. In Western culture, polygamy is frowned upon, it's illegal in this country, generally considered immoral. But in certain African tribes, polygamy is not just permitted, but it's thought very highly of. The more wives that a man has, the higher his social standing in that tribe, in that society. And so the postmodernists will say, well, there you go. See, polygamy, there's no absolute right or wrong. It depends on what culture you're in. Likewise for homosexuality. The views that you would find on homosexuality in 17th century Europe are very different from what you find today in 21st century America. We could just point to other cultures for different views as well. And the postmodernists will say, well, there's no absolute right or wrong about this. For 17th century Europeans, homosexuality was wrong, but for enlightened 21st century Americans, although Even saying they're enlightened would be, of course, a value judgment, but things are different. For 21st century Americans now, homosexuality is fine, they will say. One man's virtue is another man's vice, is really the idea here. What one person considers virtuous may well be what another man considers to be very wrong. And that's just how things go when you're a relativist. Nevertheless, there is, rather curiously, it seems, one moral absolute in the postmodernist worldview, and that is the absolute of tolerance. This is a paradox at the heart of a postmodernist view of right and wrong. What tolerance means is that you should never say that those who disagree with you are wrong, that you are right and they are wrong, because that would imply that there is an objective truth. There's a truth out there, and you have it, and someone else doesn't. It also means that you should never say that those who live differently than you, those who choose to live differently than you, who live polygamously, or they live in a homosexual relationship, you should never say that they are immoral, because that would imply, of course, that there are objective moral standards, that there's some universal standard of morality, and your views line up with it, and their views don't. Your actions line up with it, and theirs don't. And that would be anathema to the postmodernist. We might put it this way. The one moral absolute is that you should never suggest that there are any moral absolutes. And already I think you can anticipate one line of objection to this worldview, one line of critique that we will come to in due course. Finally, salvation. Remember, every worldview has a view of salvation in the broad sense. What is wrong with the world, and what is the solution? What's the problem, and what's the solution? Well, for the postmodernist, there is no real problem, objectively speaking, because there's no objective reality. If you say that there's some real objective problem that everyone should recognize and work towards solving, well, that would imply that there's objective truth, there's objective reality. The postmodernist will have to insist there's no right answer to the question, what's wrong with the world? There's one person's answer, another person's answer. One culture's answer, another culture's answer. So that's really the bottom line for the postmodernist worldview. But nevertheless, postmodernists aren't entirely consistent on this, taking a purely relativistic view. Certainly what we find in practice in our culture is that those who have a generally postmodernist outlook will typically say that there is a serious problem in the world. At least there's a problem relative to where the world is today, where the human race is today, where human society is today. And this serious problem is typically one of two things, or perhaps both. First, there's the problem of intolerance. We just don't accept others who differ from us. There are people in our world who are racist, some who are sexist, some who are homophobic, and so on. They don't accept other people who differ with them. They make negative value judgments about them, intolerance. And the other problem is inequality. Inequality. Remember I said earlier that the postmodernist outlook is radically egalitarian, wants to obliterate any sense or claim that there are objective differences and genuine inequalities between people. And so the postmodernists will say there's a big problem here, inequality. Some people have things others don't. Let's put it in the simplest terms. Some people have things that others don't. We, in this country, have good medical care, and a lot of people in Africa don't. That's a bad thing. Something needs to be done about it. So if those are the problems, what are the solutions? Well, the solution must, of course, match the problem. And if the problems are intolerance and inequality, then the solution must be to eradicate intolerance, either by re-education or by force, and to eradicate inequality, either by re-education or by force. And here I'm making some assumptions and making my judgment about how the solutions are typically presented here. I'm not going to make the full argument, but by re-education, I really mean indoctrination primarily through public education and through the media. Certainly not by rational debate or persuasion, because remember, if you're a postmodernist, there are no universal objective standards of reason that you can appeal to. So really the only tool you have at your disposal is indoctrination, reinforcing certain ideas through repetition and through rhetoric. And by force, I mean not just the force of law, although that could be used to eradicate intolerance and inequality, but as much as anything, emotional and rhetorical force, the force of words, the force of ideas, the force of expression. In other words, the way to eradicate these things is to speak in such a way as to make people like you and me, feel stupid or mean or unfashionable for taking any other view than the enlightened postmodernist one. And that's generally the approach, whether it's admitted or not, to dealing with these problems. Well, I've set out the contours, I think, of this postmodernist worldview. Again, in some respects it's not sophisticated, because what I have in mind is more a cultural, popular postmodernist outlook rather than some of the more sophisticated philosophical forms that you might come across. But let's now move into evaluation and apply some of the tools that I introduced to you earlier. I'm not going to repeat what these all are. I'm just going to list them up on the screen there. I divided them into the theoretical tools, the more intellectual tools, and then the practical tools as well that appeal more to matters of the heart. Let's try and apply some of these. And again, I'm not going to do every line of critique that we could do. I want to leave some of the fun for you in your own time to take some of these and apply them to the postmodernist worldview as we've looked at it here. But let me give you some examples of how we can apply these tools to show the deficiencies of this way of thinking. Start with consistency. And this is really a big one, because the postmodernist worldview is shot through with all kinds of quite blatant and fatal inconsistencies. The postmodernist worldview is inconsistent with itself at many points. Consider, for example, the claim that there are no objective truths. There's no objective, absolute truth. Well, in that case, what about the statement, there are no objective truths? There are no objective truths. Is that true? And in what sense is it true? Is it an objective truth? Well, if it's not, well, if it is, then it must be false, because it would be an objective truth and it's denying objective truths. If it's not an objective truth, then really why should anyone pay attention to it? You could just say, well, that's his truth, but it's not my truth. There's no rational force to the claim that there are no objective truths if it's not presented and taken to be an objective truth itself. Now, you may say, well, this just seems too easy. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, as they say. Can the postmodernist worldview really be so obviously inconsistent and self-defeating? Well, some postmodernists are sensitive to this, of course. They recognize this, and there are various attempts to get out of the problem. But these attempts to get out of this self-defeating issue usually involve watering down the radical claims of postmodernism until it's no longer a distinctive worldview. For example, someone will say, well, when I say there are no objective truths, all I mean is that everybody has their own unique perspective on the world. Well, sure, I can accept that. Everyone has their own perspective on the world. It doesn't mean there's no objective truth of the matter. Things have been watered down until it's not really a distinctive worldview at all. And this is just one example of many tenets of postmodernism, some of which we've looked at this evening, that turn out to be, when you apply them to themselves, they turn out to be self-defeating and self-refuting. You can try this. Think about other respects in which the postmodernist worldview undermines itself by its own claims. Here's another example. We talked about the absolute of tolerance. We should be universally tolerant, the postmodernists will tell us. Well, is universal tolerance possible in principle? Is it possible to tolerate everything? What about intolerance? Should we tolerate that? Well, of course, you can't consistently tolerate intolerance. If you tolerate intolerance, then you're not promoting tolerance at all. My wife told me one time she had seen this on the back of a car driving around Charlotte. Maybe you've seen this too. I hadn't seen it myself. Since this is being recorded, I'll read what this bumper sticker says. Notice, intolerance will not be tolerated. Well, when my wife told me about this, I did a bit of Googling, and I tracked down the company that sells it, and it appears to be sold, as a serious statement along postmodernist lines. It's sort of a, liberal outlook, and it's not intended to be ironic. I suppose people that have this bumper sticker think that it's really witty and clever. Apparently the fact that it's self-refuting is lost on them, or if they have noticed that, then they don't care, which is really another symptom of the whole postmodernist the whole postmodernist mindset, that you don't really need to be consistent. You don't need to use the laws of logic or rational principles in that way. But it's a useful exercise to compare the Christian worldview and the postmodernist worldview on these points about objective truth and tolerance. According to the Christian worldview, there is objective truth, and there is one right worldview. There's one correct way to think about the world. And there's no inconsistency. That in itself is a consistent position. It's a consistent position to take. There's no self-defeating problem there. But according to the postmodernist worldview, there's no objective truth, and there's no right worldview. You can't say, well, this worldview is right, and all the other worldviews are wrong. The postmodernists will want to distance themselves from the claim that there's one worldview that correctly reflects reality. Well, if that's the case, it follows that the postmodernist worldview itself can't be objectively true, and it can't be the right worldview. If there's no right worldview, then the postmodernist worldview can't be the right worldview. It's self-refuting. Postmodernism, we might say, is the worldview that repudiates all worldviews and thereby repudiates itself. Moving on to tool number 4, coherence. Here we're thinking about whether a worldview coheres well, whether it fits well, whether its parts fit together well, or whether there are aspects of this worldview that undermine other aspects. Let's consider in particular the areas of salvation and ethics, the S and the E of our TAKES acronym, and what the postmodernist worldview says under these headings. We said that according to the postmodernist worldview, the two great problems faced by the human race are intolerance and inequality. Seems to me these are very common themes for postmodernists. Intolerance and inequality are problems. But are they real problems? Are intolerance and inequality real problems? They can only be considered real problems and thus dealt with in a serious way if there is an objective reality. When you say that these are real problems, you're implying that there is something real there to make a judgment about. They can only be real problems if there is objective truth. Likewise, intolerance and inequality can only be considered moral problems, moral issues for us, if there are objective moral standards by which we can say, yes, intolerance, that is morally unacceptable. Inequality, morally unacceptable. And what this means then is that intolerance and inequality are real problems only if postmodernism is false. You can only make sense of them as real problems if you accept that the whole postmodernist package, the whole postmodernist outlook is quite mistaken, and that in fact there is objective truth and there are objective moral standards. Ironically, postmodernists have to borrow from another worldview, such as the biblical Christian worldview, in order to make sense of their own claims and their own values. Again, it's a useful exercise to compare the Christian worldview and the postmodernist worldview on these 2 points of the issues of intolerance and inequality. With a Christian worldview, from the perspective of a Christian worldview, we can admit that intolerance and inequality are real problems, at least when they're properly defined and understood. We can make sense of the idea that certain kinds of intolerance are bad and that certain kinds of inequality are bad. And we can address those problems in a way that a postmodernist can't. For example, in the Christian way of thinking, tolerance, when it's properly defined, it's not about never disagreeing with anyone. Rather, tolerance is being willing to live with, to live alongside, and even to love those who disagree with us on important issues. That's what true tolerance is. Loving. Be willing to accept the person who disagrees with you. Jesus makes radical claims. We're to love our enemies, not just those who disagree with us, but those who are our enemies we're to love. That is real tolerance. And likewise, in a Christian worldview, there are some inequalities are bad. For example, racism, when people treat people of different races unequally, without any basis, without any, if it's not relevant to their skin color, that is a bad thing. And the Christian worldview makes sense of that, and it shows how we should go about remedying that inequality. But not all inequalities are bad. There are some inequalities built into the human race that God has given, distributing things differently, and that's okay. So all these we can make sense of these ideas within a Christian worldview. But from the postmodernist perspective, as we've seen, there are no absolute truths, no absolute moral standards, and yet the postmodernist wants to insist intolerance and inequality must be eradicated, as if that's a moral imperative. That is not a coherent position. So the Christian approach to understanding and addressing intolerance and inequality is coherent, I think, in a way that the postmodernist approach is not. Okay, let me zip through here. I'm going to be relatively brief with these last two, and you can pick up any points in Q&A if you want. Moving on to the tool of conscience. How does this worldview fit with conscience? Well, as we've seen, postmodernism insists that there are no absolute moral standards. That's like an axiom of postmodernist ethics. Nevertheless, we can observe that it's a universal or a near-universal human intuition that some moral principles really are absolute. There are some moral standards that apply to everyone, everywhere, at all times. For example, sexual abuse is always wrong, especially abuse of children. Sexual abuse of children, always wrong. Even people who use child pornography know full well that it's morally wrong, unless they really are sociopathic, in which case we don't trust their moral judgments. We know there's something mentally wrong with them. What this means then is that the postmodernist view of ethics is highly counterintuitive, going against our basic moral intuitions. It flies in the face of some of our basic, strongest, most ubiquitous moral intuitions. Recall that according to the postmodernist worldview, morality is always relative. It's always relative, either to the individual or to the society in which the individual lives. But again, does this fit with what our consciences tell us about morality? It's not difficult to find some powerful counterexamples to moral relativism. If someone says that morality is relative to individuals, that each individual has his own moral system, his own moral standards, well, we might point to the examples of Jeffrey Dahmer, the notorious serial killer and cannibal. Or, more recently, quite topically in the news recently, Jerry Sandusky, convicted of child sex offenses. How credible is it to say that these men were quite within their rights to develop their own moral codes and to live consistently with them? How plausible is it to say that from their own rights, it was fine for them to do what they did, and that it's all relative to the individual? How credible is it to say that these men, well, we shouldn't say that they should have known better, because there's nothing objectively better for them to know. There are no absolute moral standards to be known by anyone and that anyone's accountable to. Well, the postmodernists, if they're going to say that sort of thing, it's very, very implausible, hard to accept. Some will say, well, morality is not relative to individuals, it's relative to societies. And you're accountable to your society, and within a society you're held to certain standards, and you're beholden to those standards. But moral values can vary, moral standards can vary from one society to another? Well, a couple of counterexamples to that would be Nazi Germany, in which it was held, at least for a while, very widely held, that Jews were less than human, or that it was okay to treat Jews abominably and to remove them from society. Were the Nazis really wrong? Were they right or wrong in their views about Jews and other minorities? For the moral relativist, the Nuremberg trials, where other countries held Nazi war criminals accountable, that was completely misguided. What they should have said is, well, the Nazis had their own moral standards and they lived consistently with them, and we shouldn't try and impose our moral standards on Nazi Germany. Another example is the Hindu custom of what is called sati. It was a custom in India, in Hindu societies, for when a man died, to place his widow alive on the funeral pyre, to burn a man's widow with his body. This was very widespread practice, and it was only when the British went in and colonized India that an end was put to this practice. But was it wrong? Was it wrong? Was it acceptable for the British to make that judgment that widow burning was morally unacceptable and that it ought to be put to an end? It's interesting what Sir Charles James Napier had to say about the issue. Sir Charles James Napier was the commander-in-chief of the British Army in India, and he was one of those who was putting an end to this practice of widow burning. He was told that the Hindu priests were complaining about the prohibition of sati by the British, and this is what he said in response. "Be it so. This burning of widows is your custom. Prepare the funeral pile. But my nation also has a custom. When men burn women alive, we hang them and confiscate all their property. My carpenters shall therefore erect gibbets on which to hang all concerned when the widow is consumed. Let us all act according to our national customs." Well, of course, he wasn't meaning that literally. That was what we call a reductio ad absurdum of cultural relativism, the idea that there are different standards, moral standards, from one society to another. It's just different customs. But it's a very good way of putting the point. All right, finally, tool number 6, livability. Livability. Can we apply this tool to the postmodernist worldview, and what do we get? Can the postmodernist worldview be lived out consistently in practice? Well, here's a case where a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that's just as well, because we're running out of time. You've probably seen this bumper sticker. I've mentioned another bumper sticker earlier, and the sort of people who have the other bumper sticker often have this one as well. The coexist bumper sticker helps us to think about whether this idea of universal tolerance is possible in practice. This bumper sticker is cleverly designed. It has the Muslim crescent as the C, and then the peace sign as the O. Then it's got the signs for male and female together with the E. The six-pointed Star of David stands for the X. Then you've got that I, the dot of the I is the five-pointed star of paganism. The S is drawn as the yin and yang of Taoism. And then finally you've got the Christian cross serving as the T. So the word coexist spelled out with all these religious symbols. And the obvious point is, well, why can't we all just get along? Why can't all these religious views just tolerate one another, get along with one another? A few years ago, someone sent me this spoof bumper sticker, which is probably a more effective refutation of the philosophy of the original than you could express in words. And in this version, you can see that the E has been replaced with the communist hammer and sickle, and the X has been replaced with the Nazi swastika. Communism and Nazism, of course, being two very, very intolerant regimes. I read recently that when this spoof was posted on a talk radio website in Milwaukee, a local organization known as the Interfaith Conference were outraged and demanded that this spoof be removed from the website. Apparently, they were not prepared to coexist with the creator of the spoof. which, is refutation in itself, self-refutation. I might add, in fact, that the original sticker itself refutes itself. For example, thinking just of the crescent there, Islam, there are militant forms of Islam, as we know, that aren't willing to coexist with Judaism and Christianity. And if you're going to tolerate those forms of Islam, then you aren't really promoting coexistence at all. So here we have an idea that sounds good in principle, but you just can't live it out in practice. That kind of universal tolerance can't be lived out in practice. And yet, to just repeat a point made earlier, the Christian worldview, unlike the postmodernist worldview, really does support coexistence. A Christian ethic does support a genuine tolerance and coexistence, but not one that sacrifices truth and reason and objective moral standards in the process. And therein lies the superiority, I think, of the Christian worldview when compared with the postmodernist one. Okay, well, that's all I'm going to say, and I apologize again, I've gone a little bit over time, but we do have time for some questions and discussion. If anyone wants to pick up on any of the points that we've covered this evening, now's your opportunity. Yes?
So since a principled egalitarianism really can't fit within the constructs of a postmodern worldview, where does that come from? Why not might makes right? The smarter, the stronger can do whatever he or she wants to do because they have the resources to do so.
You're right. I think it is arbitrary. The claim that inequality should be the principle that's applied, the absolute, can't be rationally sustained within that way of thinking. And I mentioned Nietzsche earlier, who some would argue is the forefather of the postmodernist worldview because he denied God and also denied that there's objective truth, objective moral standards. His answer was, yes, might does make right. What is right is actually what the most powerful person will make right. So I think actually his conclusion was a lot more consistent than the loosey-goosey types who just want to say peace, love, and harmony, and let's all just get on and flatten out all distinctions. Yes?
Dave, do you have any thoughts on the Christian thinkers who suggested that postmodernism has or presents some opportunities for the church in comparison to modernism and all that it did to the church?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, what do I think of those Christians who have claimed that postmodernism provides opportunities to the church? I think it does. I think, despite the fact that I ended on a negative note of critiquing postmodernism, because I think when you take it as a package, it's radically incoherent. Nonetheless, some of what postmodernists are saying, critiquing modernism, or critiquing that just relying on human reason, science will save us, science will sort everything out. The postmodernist critique of that enlightenment, optimism, and hubris is actually very useful to us, because we can agree with that. We can say that the modernist view, when it placed all its faith in human reason and human science, it was mistaken, and things haven't worked out. But the answer is not to take modernism even deeper, to take God even more consistently out of the picture, but actually, if anything, to go back to the worldview, the Christian worldview that preceded that, which provides the basis for the sort of claims that we want to make about morality and all the rest of it. So the postmodernist critique of modernism can be useful to us, but we don't want to endorse postmodernism's alternative to modernism. We have our own superior, coherent alternative to it. Does that make sense? Yes.
I'm wondering if you think, this is an example of re-education. Almost every form we fill out now, instead of saying sex, male or female, it says gender.
Yeah.
And in our society, we've replaced sex with gender almost across the board. And I've heard some people say that is to open the door to this postmodern thought. To the point where now, sometimes when you apply for something or fill out a form, there's this options of male, female, and other.
Right, yeah,
self-defined.
yeah, exactly. Yes, simply the way that you present the alternatives or present the options connotes something in itself. And yeah, I used the word gender earlier. Some purists would say that gender is a grammatical category, and it's not actually. We should be talking about sex, male and female. So yes, even the choice of words that you use and the categories that you use can reinforce a certain way of thinking. It can be very subtle, and I think you're onto something. I don't think that the people who design these forms are actively trying to promote that worldview. I think, though, that they are being implicitly pressured or feeling that they have to accommodate it because people will kick up such a rumpus if they don't. You actually have a minority of people who are very vocal and are very clever, very strategic in the way that they want to promote their agenda. And those who aren't aware of what's going on behind the scenes don't realize how much they're capitulating to it. Any other questions? Okay. Question there? Yeah.
I'm just wondering if the fact that equality is such a big deal for them is one of the two main problems they've chosen to focus on is really about tolerance and equality.
Sorry, I'm not picking up on...
Do you think that they are really interested in universal equality, or is it more about trying to get animals to have more of a say in things, or the women's right movement, or sexual preference, or...
Well...
It just doesn't make sense to me that that equality would be their heart. I see how that could be the Christian's heart, but...
Well, it depends what you mean by equality. Equality in what respects? I mean, Christians clearly want to insist on equality, promote equality in certain respects, okay? But we also want to acknowledge that God has built inequalities or genuine differences in certain areas of human life, and we want to acknowledge that too. What I think in many respects postmodernism is reacting against is actually in a Christian worldview. I think it's almost defining itself by denying the sort of boundaries and norms that the Christian worldview has placed its stamp on particularly Western culture. So when we insist on male and female, heterosexual relationships and so forth, what postmodernism wants to do is to blur or ultimately obliterate those boundaries and norms, and it does so by insisting on equality. That's how you argue the point. You say, well, when you make those distinctions with norms, you're not treating people equally. Okay? So my way of putting it was really to try and encapsulate how they present the things. You know, whenever we hear about, for example, the gay marriage, what's the argument for gay marriage? It's about equality. It's giving homosexuals the same rights and opportunities as heterosexuals. So it may not be that equality is ultimately what it's all about, but equality tends to be the principle that is used to promote the agenda, if I can put it that way. Yes?
I was just going to say that, in fact, I think is somewhat of a logical conclusion, making everything equal. If we weren't created and we just showed up, then it only makes sense that whatever we are, we decide.
Yeah, you're right. There is a kind of consistency there, that once you take out any absolute norms, standards for the human race, in a sense, anything goes. And anything goes is pure equality. Everything is flattened. There's no ordering principles at all. But that's really nihilism. It's not just equality. It's nihilism, that there's no values to be made at all. Okay, we'll take one more. Yes?
Is socialism a postmodern idea?
Wow.
Or redistribution
Yeah.
of wealth,
Man, you just opened a big can of worms just as I was drawing to a close. Is socialism part of it? Well, my short answer is I think that a lot of the support for socialist policies is driven by the sort of values that are presented by this worldview. Inequality, some people are rich and some people are poor. That's intrinsically wrong. It doesn't matter how they got their wealth or how they got poor. What's wrong is that they're not equal, and socialism is a means of reducing that inequality. Of course, the way it reduces that inequality is to make everyone equally poor, in my view. But I can't give that argument here. But yes, I think that there's a connection there, but it's not a straightforward one. I'm not going to say that everyone who advocates socialism or something like socialism is thereby a postmodernist, but there is an affinity, I think, there. Okay, we'd better draw it to a close there. Let me close us in prayer. Father, I thank you for our time together. Thank you that you have given us minds that can reason. We thank you that the truth is indeed out there, and you are the truth, and your Son Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. We thank you that there is an anchor for human thought, for human behavior, because you are the absolute creator, the determiner of all things. And we thank you that the postmodernist worldview is not correct, because it offers no hope, nothing like the hope and the peace that is offered by the Christian worldview. Father, we pray you help us to understand these things and also to have compassion on those who think this way. It's easy perhaps to be tempted to ridicule, although in some respects it's worthy of ridicule. We pray that you would give us compassion on those who have become quite captivated and deluded by this way of thinking, and that we would unashamedly but winsomely point them towards the truth that is out there and is indeed come into our world through our Lord Jesus Christ. We pray this in his name. Amen.